Bruce Cummings, welcome back.
Thank you, John.
Well, we know what Donald Trump wants out of the Korean talks. He wants the Nobel Peace Prize, so he's pretty motivated to get some kind of deal. According to some commentators, for example, Nicholas Kristof at the New York Times, Trump made a huge concession, the suspension of military exercises with South Korea, on top of the summit meeting itself, unprecedented in the last 75 years, and the legitimacy the summit gives Kim. Kristof says that within North Korea, the very special bond that Trump says he formed with Kim will be portrayed this way. Kim forced the American president, through his successful nuclear and missile tests, to accept North Korea as a nuclear equal, to provide security guarantees to North Korea, and to cancel war games with South Korea that the North has protested for decades. In exchange for these confessions, Trump seems to have won astonishingly little, Kristof argues. In their joint statement, Kim merely reaffirmed the same commitment to denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula that North Korea has made repeatedly since 1992. I wonder if you agree with that reading of the joint statement.
No, I don't agree with it. The U.S. has refused to talk to North Korean leaders literally since 1945, more specifically since February 1946, when Kim Il-sung came to effective power as the head of an interim People's Committee that the American occupation commander in the South refused to recognize. And we've refused to deal with North Korea ever since. I don't believe that in any sense Trump accepted Kim as an equal who comes from a nuclear weapons state. I'm sure North Korea would like to trumpet that at home if they can. But the point of this first meeting was to begin a process in which they would no longer be a nuclear weapons state. As for canceling the military exercises, the U.S. did that back in 1994. Bill Clinton did that as a concession to the North. South Korea is one of the only countries in the world where the U.S. can get away with gigantic military exercises with tens of thousands of troops, both Korean and American. And in that sense, I think the Pentagon probably won't be too happy to not be able to do these games. But it's a small concession. What I thought was interesting was that Trump said these were provocative games. Yeah. No president has ever said that before. But he's right. I mean, he, in his own madness, he sort of brings innocent eyes to the Korean situation. He doesn't know much about it. He doesn't know the history. But if you look at the games, they game out how to decapitate the North Korean regime, for example, how to overthrow it by sending the Marines into the port of Wonsan and marching across the peninsula to take down the government. They also have simulated nuclear drills. President Obama, during one of these games, sent B-52s to drop dummy nuclear weapons on South Korean islands.
Wow.
But these are very threatening to North Korea. They always have been. But I've never heard of a president who would say they're provocative. The curious thing about this is Trump's utter lack of experience and his lack of any ties to the Washington foreign policy establishment. I mean, people like Nicholas Kristof, who will have a laundry list 89 miles long before North Korea will be recognized. I think, those two things, his basic innocence regarding our long history with North Korea and his lack of ties to the Beltway folks, gives him a certain freedom to do something like this.
Trump, before the meeting, said, quote, "They have to de-nuke," and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo adds that it has to be, quote, "complete, verifiable, and irreversible," close quote. What does North Korea want in exchange?
Well, they want a peace treaty to end the Korean War, which I think is quite doable and something Trump seems to want. I think he senses he might get a Nobel Prize out of that. I don't think that, but probably he does. Cessation of the war games, which he's already gotten, and normalization of relations with the U.S., which would probably have to come in the context of a peace treaty, because you really can't make a peace treaty with a country that you don't recognize. And I think fourth, they want a lot of aid. And Trump several times mentioned that the war games were so expensive. Well, so is our presence in South Korea with 28,000 troops, 50,000 more in Japan, the 3rd Marine Division in Okinawa, particularly the Marines. They're not defending Japan. They're oriented toward fighting if a war were to break out on the Korean Peninsula. And that whole entourage of forces costs tens of billions of dollars a year to maintain. I saw one estimate that when you sort of factor in all the things that we use to deter North Korea or to prepare for fighting North Korea, it might be as high as $40 billion a year.
Wow.
So North Korea is probably looking for something like $1 billion or $2 billion a year in aid in return for giving up their nukes and their missiles, which is essentially what they nearly got back in 2000 from Bill Clinton. I imagine that's what they're thinking about, and it's a drop in the bucket. It's a small price to pay to denuclearize North Korea. But I mean, the whole business of denuclearization is a misnomer because they want us to withdraw our nuclear forces from the region, B-52s, B-1 bombers from Guam, Trident submarines. All of that has to presumably be reoriented away from the Korean Peninsula. But we have bombers that can lift off in the Midwest and bomb North Korea, turn around and come home without landing. So we will never be able to fully satisfy North Korea short of giving up all of our nuclear weapons. I think we've already achieved something that some of the best experts in the U.S. have called for years, and that is a moratorium on testing missiles and testing atomic bombs. And they've done that, in effect, since last November.
We haven't talked about South Korea yet, but South Korean President Moon is the one who really took the initiative in getting this whole thing going. What does South Korea want?
Well, South Korea wants peace on the Korean Peninsula. It wants to replace the armistice with a peace treaty. It wants to draw down its own immense defense expenditures. It has a 650,000 person army. But above all, it wants to avoid war. President Moon has said there will be no war on the Korean Peninsula, but the way Trump was talking and Kim Jong-un talking back last fall when Trump threatened to totally destroy North Korea, it was really touch and go right up to December when they wanted to appoint Victor Cha as ambassador to South Korea, and Victor quit because he thought Trump was moving in the direction of a preemptive strike, a so-called bloody nose for North Korea. So I think South Korea and the president of South Korea have been very deft at moving things off of a military alternative and toward a diplomatic path.
Is Kim thinking about the Chinese model of a one-party state and very aggressive economic development?
Well, according to South Korean experts that I know, he does want to be the Deng Xiaoping of North Korea, in that Deng made these fundamental reforms that were irreversible in 1979, pushing China to join the world economy and really follow Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan in an export-led development model with heavy involvement of the state. And of course, they've done very well, growing by double digits for most of the last 30 years or more. And I think that's exactly what the North Koreans are hoping to do. They haven't done it before because they've been so worried about their security. And if they open up in a context where you have someone like John Bolton in Washington wanting to overthrow them, which I'm sure he still does, it's just very dangerous. But I think the reason they have kept calling for security guarantees is so they can feel secure in opening up. And I would think simply because of the size of the countries that probably Vietnam is a better model for North Korea than China. But with Vietnam and China, you have two states that have grown very rapidly using market principles while having heavy state involvement and ultimate power in the hands of the Communist Party. So I think that model is very influential in North Korea.